You're listening to the Vibrant Happy Women podcast, episode number 121. We can be so hard on ourselves, feeding our mind a constant string of negativity and criticism. But when we learn to be compassionate with ourselves, talking to ourselves as we would to a friend, the way we show up in every aspect of life will change for the better. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Vibrant Happy Women podcast. Stories of vibrant women living happy lives. And now your host, Jen Riday.
Hey friends, Jen here, and this is Vibrant Happy Women. Welcome back. Last week I spoke with Grace Estrapo all about tweaking a few little things in your day without even taking any extra time to add more peace and that sense of zen. So she calls herself a Zen master, and I don't know about you, but I want to be a Zen master. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and check it out and try out Grace's ideas. I think they're really valid and helpful, especially for those of us who are really busy. Today, I'm so excited to share my conversation with Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff was here in Madison, Wisconsin, presenting a workshop called Mindful Self-Compassion, and it was phenomenal. It happened right when everything was going down with my 14-year-old who was having some issues around, a little bit after spring break, and it just nourished my soul. And sometimes you learn things at the heart level that are hard to put into words, but Dr. Neff did a really great job in this interview sharing how you too can engage in mindful self-compassion. It begins with this idea of loving, connected presence. Breathing for yourself, maybe extending your breath to another, really being mindful and using touch and meditation and changing your thoughts and letting go of shame to really be compassionate with yourself. And that helps us to be more compassionate with others. It's such a beautiful interview, and I can't wait for you to listen. So let's go ahead and dive in. Kristin Neff is currently an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. She's a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research, conducting the first empirical studies on self-compassion over a decade ago. In addition to writing numerous academic articles and book chapters on the topic, she is the author of the book, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, released by William Morrow. In conjunction with her colleague, Dr. Chris Germer, she has developed an empirically supported 8-week training program called Mindful Self-Compassion and offers workshops on self-compassion worldwide, which I got to attend recently, so I can't wait to talk. Kristin and Chris are also authors of the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, a proven way to accept yourself, build inner strength, and thrive. So I love your work, Kristin. Welcome to Vibrant Happy Women.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And I know you have a poem you want to share with us. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. This is a poem. It was actually the last two stanzas of a poem that I really like, that I think kind of captures the essence of self-compassion and really compassion in general. It's as the poem Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. And she writes, "Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. And then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, 'It is I you have been looking for,' and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend."
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So tell us what that poem means to you and when you became interested in self-compassion and kindness and all of the things related.
Well, so the reason I like the poem is I think it really does highlight how we need to turn toward our struggle, toward our sorrow, toward our suffering with the same loving kindness and tenderness like we would show to a friend who is suffering. We need to do that with ourselves, really, in order to be able to cope and get by in life. And so there's so much emphasis in our society on being compassionate to others, which of course is really important and we should all practice it. But so many people are very good at being kind and compassionate to others, but just beat themselves up mercilessly, especially if their struggle comes from, feeling inadequate in some way or failing at something. So, I really learned, I think through my own experience, that the more we're able to support ourselves, to be that good friend to ourselves, having the shadow of kindness that follows us wherever we go, especially when times are difficult, it just makes a huge difference in our ability to cope and be strong in situations that are quite challenging.
So tell us more about how you developed this desire to teach self-compassion. Where did that journey begin? What did it look like in your life? And then how did you reach the definitions of self-compassion and all the amazing things you teach? Where did that all begin?
So I certainly didn't invent the idea of self-compassion. It's really, I think, at the heart of many religious traditions, spiritual traditions, philosophical traditions. The idea of being kind to yourself and loving and supportive when you're struggling, it's not really a new idea. And so I actually learned it from a Buddhist meditation group. I started practicing meditation when I was going through a very stressful time in my life. I was actually finishing up my PhD at UC Berkeley. And so I thought, meditation might help me with my stress. And what really surprised me, what I wasn't expecting, is the woman leading the group talked not only about mindfulness, which of course is very important, but also about this importance of being a good friend to yourself, of being compassionate, supportive, tender, emotionally warm with yourself when you're struggling. And so I started practicing this and just saw that it immediately made a huge difference in my ability to cope with the stress I was going through. Again, this sense of support, of kindness. It really, I could see it in my personal life. And then what happened was I got a position as a postdoc with one of the country's leading self-esteem researchers. And I started understanding on the problems with self-esteem, for instance, that we need to be special and above average to feel okay about ourselves. It's not okay to be average. And so it leads to this constant, jockeying for a position. How do I compare to her? How do I stack up to him? And really the biggest problem with self-esteem is that it's contingent on success. We feel good about ourselves when we succeed, when we're liked by others. But what happens when we really need, that sense of self-worth, when we fail, when we look in the mirror, we don't like what we see, or when someone does a lot better than us? Our self-esteem deserts us really when we need it the most. And that's where self-compassion comes in, because, compassion by definition is aimed at suffering. The word means compassion, to suffer with. So when we're with ourselves, when we're struggling in this kind, caring way, it helps us feel good about ourselves, not because we're special and above average, just because we're a flawed human being doing the best we can like everyone else. It's a much more stable sense of value and self-worth. So again, it was during my postdoc, I started thinking about all these issues from more of a scientific perspective. And then when I got the job at UT Austin, I developed a scale to measure it and, kind of tried to define it clearly. And then really the self-compassion field of research just took off. And now there's 1,500 studies and dissertations looking at it. So it's really been quite remarkable. Yeah.
So for those not familiar with your work, what is a good summarizing definition of self-compassion?
Right. So self-compassion is it's a combination of things. The first thing is mindfulness. Actually, there's a lot of people know about mindfulness, which is being present with what is. And so with self-compassion, we have to be mindful and present with our own pain. We have to acknowledge, hey, this is really hard for me right now. If we're just lost in problem-solving mode or lost in the drama of what's happening, we can't step outside of ourselves like a good friend and say, hey, you're having a hard time, you need support. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the foundation, is being mindful when we're having a hard time. And then just really responding to ourselves with kindness, being a good supportive friend, being warm, being tender, kind of motivating ourselves to get through the situation from a constructive point of view, as opposed to our usual pattern, which is like just to beat ourselves up. It's because you're a lazy slob. You deserve this because you're worthless. I mean, it's really quite interesting when you ask people to look at how they treat their close friends when they're struggling and how they treat themselves. It's often radically different. I mean, we would never say the types of things we say to ourselves with someone we cared about. And yet we say it all the time to ourselves. You're fat, you're lazy, you're a slob, you'll never amount to anything. You should have done better, in this really kind of harsh, cold tone. And that really undermines our ability to perform and to succeed, because we kind of are constantly attacking ourselves. So self-compassion, first of all, we're aware of the pain we're going through. We have a kind response. But really important, what makes self-compassion different from self-pity is this recognition that, everyone's imperfect. We all struggle. We all make mistakes. We all have difficult things happening. It's not just me. And we know this logically, but what tends to happen experientially when we fail or when something really difficult happens, we feel like, this shouldn't be happening. This is not supposed to be this way, as if everyone else in the world at that moment is not failing, is not struggling, and living a normal, perfect life, and it's just me who's having this difficulty. So, the word compassion actually means to suffer with, as I said. There's a sense of connectedness inherent to the experience of compassion. So when we get out of our sense of, oh, woe is me, and just realize, hey, whoever said life's supposed to be perfect, whoever said I'm supposed to be perfect, this is what it means to be a human. This is how I learn and grow. When we take that more connected mind state toward ourselves, again, it's really good for psychological well-being and our ability to cope with what's happening. So there's basically three things: mindfulness, kindness, and a sense of common humanity. Or if you want kind of the more accessible way of describing it, is loving, connected presence. So it means when we suffer, we struggle, we're having a hard time, we kind of turn toward ourselves with loving, connected presence. And that really transforms what we're experiencing and helps us cope.
Well, so if someone listening is struggling, which would be everyone, because we have this common humanity,
yes,
what would you say to them to get started with moving into this space of self-compassion?
Right. So a lot of it is just getting over these beliefs we get from our culture that somehow we aren't supposed to be compassionate with ourselves, that we should always be focused on other people, helping others. There's a lot of belief that somehow it's selfish to be kind to yourself. There's a lot of other beliefs that get in the way. We think, we're going to lose our motivation. We think we're going to be weak. And we think we're going to be self-centered. And the research shows it's the exact opposite, right? So again, self-compassion is not a weakness. It's an incredible source of coping and resilience. It doesn't make you lazy. It actually motivates you. Just like if you had a coach, you either said, you're a lazy slob, you'll never amount to anything, give up now, versus a coach that said, hey, I believe in you. You could do it. Here's how we're going to try this and this approach, but, believes in you, even though they may give you advice for your behavior. Of course, you're going to be more motivated. And we know that self-compassionate people are more motivated. And here's the big thing. It is not selfish, because the more resources you give yourself, the more your state of mind is filled with loving, connected presence as opposed to self-pity and shame, right? Mm-hmm. The more you're actually going to be able to give to other people. When you're in a state of shame and self-loathing, you have no resources to give to anyone else. And also the people you're interacting with, they're interacting with someone who's in a state of shame and self-loathing, which doesn't help them. Whereas when you're in a state of loving, connected presence, everyone who interacts with you actually benefits by your own presence. So I really think that being self-compassionate is one of the biggest gifts we can give to others. And I just have to say, I really saw this in my personal life. Your listeners may not know this, but when I really kind of found out the power of self-compassion was when my son was diagnosed with autism. And it was definitely a tough journey, no doubt about it. He had terrible tantrums. He had a hard time interacting with people. He wasn't potty trained till age 5. And luckily I had a solid self-compassion practice by the time he got diagnosed. So whenever he had these challenging behaviors, the first thing I would do was support myself. I would acknowledge how hard it was for me, acknowledge my feelings of feeling overwhelmed and helpless, and, that I wanted to jump out a window. I would just really hold myself, again, in this loving, connected presence. And what I found without a shadow of a doubt is not only did it give me more stability to help him, to be there for him, to be more loving to my son, but that also he would resonate with my mood. I mean, those times when maybe I would lose it, I'm only human. Sometimes I would just be really frustrated and irritated. His behavior would get worse every single time I did that. Like his tantrums would go up, his behavior would be more volatile when I was internally volatile. But if I could maintain this more peaceful, accepting, loving state of mind, I'm doing the best I can. This is really hard. And I focus on myself. I'm here for myself. I found that he would really respond positively to that. So, again, I got a lot of research to support this idea, but I really believe in self-compassion from my own life experience. It makes a huge difference. It helps yourself. It helps others.
So a lot of people say that we need to love ourselves first in order to be able to love others. And does that resonate for you with what you said about self-compassion?
I mean, put it this way. It's like empirically, it's not true. And if you actually look around the people you know in your life, it's not true in that there are many people who are truly kind, caring, compassionate to others, giving, a lot of nurses, a lot of parents. They really do care about others. And they aren't necessarily that way with themselves. right? So it's always in the direction of people being kinder and more compassionate to others than themselves. But there are many people who like beat themselves up, even though they might be angels with others. And so it actually is possible to be that way. The only problem is you can't sustain it. Over time, you will burn out if you just give and give and give and don't replenish your own resources. You don't acknowledge your own struggle. You will burn out. So I would say self-compassion is necessary to really sustain giving to others, to be able to like not lose yourself while giving to others. But people do quite well at being kind to others and bad to themselves all the time. It's just not a sustainable way of being.
So if someone is in a moment of deep stress, do they begin by repeating self-compassionate phrases? Do they begin by being mindful? What's the first step that we do to start being self-compassionate right in that moment?
Yeah, well, so really the first step has to be mindfulness. You have to be aware that you're struggling. And again, you might think that's totally obvious, but we need to be aware in a kind of mindful, balanced way. So in other words, it's not like, I'm struggling when you're lost in the storyline. Or it can be like, I got to get this suffering away. I got to fix this. It's horrible. The worst thing that ever happened to me. That's not helpful. But you need to be able to kind of step outside of yourself and say, wow, I'm having a really hard time right now. This is really hard. What can I do to help myself in this moment? So that's really the first step, is just awareness that you're in this state and not being so lost in it, having a little more balanced perspective. And then there's different ways to support yourself, right? So for some people, it could be like, saying, well, what would I say to a really good friend who is in the same situation? What tone of voice would I use? Maybe speaking to yourself silently, of course, but kind of with warmth and tenderness, words of support and kindness, of understanding, as opposed to harsh self-judgment. So that's one thing, is just think about what I would say to myself. Another really easy way to activate the sense of care is through touch, right? Is mammals, and this is not just humans, but all mammals, we're really programmed biologically to respond to warm, tender touch as a signal of care. Just think of your own mother or your own parent, or maybe even like a kitten with its pups, little baby kittens. Mother cat with its kittens, right? So we're designed physiologically to respond to touch as an indicator of care and support. So a very easy thing to do is just to touch yourself in some way that feels comforting. Put your hands on your heart, or hold your own hand, or maybe, cradle your face. People are different in terms of what works, but it's often a quick and easy way to let your body know that you're there, you're present, you support yourself, you care. So that's a good thing. And then also, again, just the wisdom of remembering that, hey, this is the human experience. It's not just you. The idea that somehow we're supposed to be perfect and get it right and that life's supposed to go well. It's one thing to acknowledge that logically, but to really take that in, hey, this hurts, this is hard. But this is also how we learn and grow. And this is, this is not just me. We're all just doing the best we can. And that's kind of the wisdom element of self-compassion. So when we bring in that wisdom, it also really helps us be more self-compassionate. There's many, many ways to access it. Put it that way. It's not, but it's also not rocket science, because we know how to be kind to others. We just need to remember to do it with ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I was at your mindful self-compassion workshop in Wisconsin not too long ago. And I felt like a lot of the beginning of self-compassion is focusing on the breath. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, well, so the breath is really a tool and anchor of mindfulness of the present moment, right? So, first of all, meditation is not at all necessary to learn self-compassion. It is a tried and tool, though, because when we focus on our breath, we aren't lost in the storyline of what's happening, and we're just aware of the change in the breath, which means we're aware of the present moment. And it's a useful tool for, again, just noticing what's happening. So you focus on your breath. And if you're struggling, for instance, we know that focusing on the breath kind of help calm and soothe ourselves. But for some people, focusing on the breath actually isn't that useful. And it may be something like feeling the soles of your feet, or just noticing that the stabbing pain in your chest. That might be the way to trigger mindfulness. So the breath isn't special, but it is an effective tool, because we always have it, or else you're dead.
Right. It is there. That is comforting.
It's always there.
Everyone probably has their favorite form of exercise, but sometimes you just want to shake it up a little bit. And sometimes you want to work on toning and sculpting some of those hard to work areas. For me, that's my abs, my thighs, and probably my triceps. Well, I've been doing the 30-day PVolve challenge lately, and I want to tell you, it's really good. I'm noticing big results, and I want to challenge you guys to join me for it. I'm going to tell you the details in just a minute. So PVolve was founded by Stephen Pastorino, and he uses a method called the prehab method, which helps you elongate and create lean muscles. It eliminates bulk, and you focus on stretching and opening the hips. Plus, they have this really cool exercise ball called the P-ball, which has elastic bands that hold the ball high up between your thighs, so you could really work your core, your glutes, and your thighs. Even better, PVolve has this online streaming service with hundreds of videos that help you work all those areas, work up a really good sweat. You can do your exercises anytime, anywhere from any device. I want to invite you to join me for the PVolve 30-day challenge. I can just imagine a bunch of vibrant, happy women all over the world doing this challenge together, sculpting and toning and sweating and feeling great with great endorphins that come with exercise. To sign up for that free 30-day challenge, just go to pvolve.com/happywomen. That's PVolve.com/happywomen and enter promo code happywomen at checkout. When I lived in Germany a long time ago, I learned just how medicinal and healing herbal teas can be. Chamomile tea can calm you down, and peppermint tea can wake you up and help with your digestion. And there is a tea for everything, even for detoxing your body. Teamy Blends is a company that specializes in teas that help you detox. They have a 30-day program that's easy and everyone can do it, no matter their fitness level. All you have to do is drink your Teamy Skinny in the morning and drink the Colon Cleanse every other night. It's super easy. Just add this to your routine and start getting rid of all the toxins that are holding your body back from naturally digesting and metabolizing. Sometimes we just need to help our body function at its best. And when it does function better, our body more easily lets go of the weight. Teamy Blends doesn't just help with weight loss, it helps you to feel energized and amazing. Doing Teamy's 30-day detox has helped me to have more energy and let go of some pounds. And that's a good thing. You can get 15% off your purchase at Teamy by going to teamyblends.com. That's TEAMI blends.com and use promo code Vibrant15 at checkout. Again, that's teamyblends.com and use code Vibrant15 at checkout to get 15% off your order. In the workshop, you taught us a meditation where we take a breath for ourselves and then a breath maybe for another person. So talk us through that. I found that really helpful.
Yeah, it's a really useful practice, especially in a caregiving situation or when you're with someone and you're really struggling with what they're feeling or what you're feeling with them. And so what it is it's when you breathe in, you just kind of imagine that you're breathing in compassion for yourself. You're kind of acknowledging this is really hard for me. Maybe if you're a caregiver, you're dealing with somebody who's really sick, for instance, you're kind of acknowledging I'm feeling pain just like this person is by being in their presence. Maybe it's not at the same degree, but you're just acknowledging this is hard for me. You breathe in for yourself, but then you breathe out for the person. It's hard for them as well, and they're suffering. So what it does when you breathe in for yourself and breathe out for the other, it's a way of acknowledging, I think, the pain of both yourself and the other, instead of usually when we just focus on the other and we totally forget about ourselves. It kind of sets up a sense of connectedness naturally, breathing in, breathing out, remembering that, again, we're all part of this great web of life. We all struggle. It also has, by focusing on the breath, again, the breath always kind of is a great tool for mindfulness and bringing us into the present moment. And the reason this is so nice is a lot of people say, for instance, to caregivers, practice self-care. But self-care is always off the job. Most of the techniques, like, go do yoga, visit with your friends, eat healthy, get a massage. But what do you do when you're with someone and they're physically ill or really emotionally going through a hard time and you're feeling it, you're resonating with their pain? What do you do in the moment when you're with the other person? And the breath is a great way to, again, acknowledge your own struggle, but also acknowledge the other's struggle. So it's a really nice practice, and caregivers especially like it.
So tell us the story of being on the airplane with your son and how, just to illustrate, because a lot of listeners of the show are moms, and I love how that played out for you. So let you tell that.
Yeah, and so it's kind of related to this fact that when your child's screaming or having a hard time, for instance, your mirror neurons are actually resonating and the pain centers of your brain are lighting up. So it's really real suffering. And so I think a lot of moms can resonate with this because, of course, you're very empathetically attuned to your own children. And so what happened was I was taking Rowan to London, where his grandparents live. I was on a transatlantic flight. And it was that point in the flight where they turned the lights down so everyone can get some sleep. And for whatever reason, I have no idea why, it triggered Rowan. And he was 5 years old. And he just went into a full-on, like, screaming, flailing tantrum on the plane. So, of course, I just wanted to die, right? I felt bad for disturbing the other people. I felt self-conscious. I figured a lot of people wouldn't know he's autistic and are probably judging me or judging him. And, I just felt overwhelmed. So I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I have very few options. And I came up with the brilliant idea of taking him to the toilet, letting him scream in there, so maybe it would muffle his cries, buy us a few moments. So, I carry him, get a few pretty big 5-year-old carrying him down the aisle of the plane, get to the toilet, which of course is occupied, right? And so that plan didn't work out. So, I was just there in that little space outside the toilet. And Rowan was screaming, and I just kind of realized that the only thing I could do was give myself compassion. It really was my only option. But it was a good option, right? So I made sure Rowan was safe, but I would say maybe 95% of my attention was toward myself, just really, this is so hard for you, Kristin. I'm so sorry. I spoke to myself, very supportively, tenderly, kindly, just assuring myself of my own support and care and concern. And when I did that, what I found was not only did it help me, but again, kind of like I said, it helped Rowan because he could sense the change in my internal mind state as I got less overwhelmed with distress and actually started being filled more with this sense of love and connection and presence. It actually helped him, and he calmed down as well. So, and we had many experiences like that through the years. And again, that's why I'm so passionate about self-compassion, especially for parents. It's not true that you have to focus all your love and care on your kids. If you focus, first of all, love and care, they aren't like limited quantities where you got 7 units and I make it 4 to myself. I only have 3 left over for my kids. Yeah. It doesn't work that way, right? It's an unlimited pool. And actually, the more we call in this loving, connected presence, the more we have to give to others. It's like we're tapping into this pool, which is so much larger than ourselves. And so I really think for parents, they need to give themselves permission to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that they're struggling too. They aren't perfect, to acknowledge that they're going to make mistakes, they're going to do the best they can, and to really be understanding, to be patient, to be kind, and be supportive to themselves. And the more they do that, the more they'll be able to be loving, kind, and supportive to their children, right? So the two really go hand in hand. And I also this is a great phrase for parents, but for anyone really, just when you really accept the imperfection of life and the imperfection of yourself, and you give up this agenda of everything going perfectly and getting it right all the time, what you start doing is you start embracing the idea of the compassionate mess. There's a meditation teacher who says, the goal of practice is just to be a compassionate mess. In other words, we can read all the self-help books we want. We can go on, numerous meditation retreats. We can get it all right, but we're still going to be a mess because we're human beings, and human beings are not perfect. So we'll never get rid of the fact that we are a mess and our life is a mess. But what we can do, what is an actual achievable goal, is to be a compassionate mess. So every time you struggle, you make a mistake, or you get overwhelmed, or something's up with your kids, you can bring compassion to the situation. And, it won't necessarily change the situation, but it'll give you the emotional resources you need to cope. And again, so that your primary response is one of kind of some calm and some connectedness, as opposed to just being overwhelmed and distraught. And that is an achievable goal. I can check that box off.
Yeah. And giving yourself the permission to be a mess, finally, instead of perfection.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, Carl Rogers has this famous quote, the curious paradox is the more I accept myself, the more I can change, right? So when you become a compassionate mess, ironically, that's going to give you more resources to be able to do the best you can. Yeah, you won't be perfect, but maybe you can, in this kind of calmer mind state, you can think of more creative solutions to your problems. So, it actually does help you be your best person, but it comes from this sense of unconditional acceptance as opposed to I got to get it right in order to accept myself. So it's pretty powerful stuff, and the thing about, of course, love and kindness and appreciation, all those things are amazingly important. But the thing about compassion, because, by definition, it's aimed at suffering, it's aimed at struggle, it really helps us deal with those things that tend to knock us off balance, when really difficult things happen. And those are the moments when we really need the positive resources the most. So it's kind of like it almost has this almost alchemical quality of transforming suffering. It still hurts like hell, but holding it in this loving, connected presence actually means that our awareness can be more grounded in this loving, connected presence as opposed to just the distress and the suffering. And that's really its magic right there.
So you mentioned a chemical change. What do you think is happening in our bodies as we tap into that loving, connected presence?
Yeah. So, I mean, we know this a little bit through self-report research. I'd like to do more research on the physiology, but basically, as human beings, we have two basic nervous system responses. We have the sympathetic nervous response, which is our fight, flight, or free response. All animals have this. So when there's a threat or a danger in the environment, and let's say we fail, our self-concept is threatened. And from ourselves point of view, we think we are like being attacked when we fail or feel inadequate. And so what that tends to do is trigger the sympathetic nervous system response, right? And so we feel stressed, we feel overwhelmed, we can't think straight, our attention narrows. And basically we do things like we beat ourselves up or we hide in shame because we're trying to keep ourselves safe at some level. This is this fight, flee, or play dead, right? These are ways that maybe we can keep ourselves safe from danger. But the problem is, of course, when we, like for instance, when we fight the problem, we fight ourselves by beating ourselves up. It actually just makes things worse, right? It actually increases the sense of threat. So another way we have to feel safe is through sympathetic nervous activity. Parasympathetic, the nervous system, which is basically what mammals have. This is the system where, we feel safe because we feel connected, we feel loved, we feel cared for. It's related to the attachment system and being cared for by our parents, or we can also trigger this system by caring for ourselves. And so, the first system is linked to things like cortisol and adrenaline, the threat defense response. The care system is more associated with like opioids and oxytocin and kind of that feel-good sense. And so, in some ways, what we're doing with self-compassion is we're helping ourselves feel safe less from, this threat defense, beating ourselves up way of being with ourselves, more through this caring, nurturing, tender, warm response to ourselves. And that makes us feel safe and also changes our physiology. So some of the data we have is that it, reduces the cortisol and activation of the sympathetic nervous system and increases things like heart rate variability, which means you can flexibly respond to any threats. So, and you can really feel it when you practice it. Like if you put your hands on your heart, that doesn't work for everyone, but if it works for you, you can actually feel your system kind of relax, calm down. Probably what's happening, we need some data online to figure out what's happening physiologically as we practice self-compassion. But I suspect we're downregulating sympathetic, increasing parasympathetic response. And that's why it feels more safe and relaxing and it feels good.
I love that. And you said putting your hand on your heart. What are some other ways we can, activate various, in the workshop, you had us stand with our fists clenched and then describe how we felt. And I was shocked. I was shocked how quickly I actually felt anger and rage in my body. So is it true that our physiology, the things we're doing with our body, it affects our mood and those chemicals just by touch and poses and all of that?
Right. Yeah. Well, so, usually it's not like we go around with our fists clenched intentionally, but what happens when difficult things happen or it's scary or we feel nervous is we tense up our body, right? Mm-hmm. And we know, again, sometimes if you get really bad news, you'll get a huge hit of cortisol and you'll feel stressed. And again, that danger system is saying, run for the hills, threat. Yeah. And so our body clenches up, and that's kind of symbolized by that clenched fist, that sense of, having to fight things and you're clenched and tight. And then what happens, we can actually use touch to help soothe and calm ourselves. And just think of cradling a crying baby, or, you give your friend a hug when they're really upset. These are natural caregiving responses we just have built into us as human beings. And then, so if we learn to do that with ourselves, now I have to say, it feels weird at first because we're so unused to it, to actually giving it to ourselves, but it does get more natural over time. You can hold your own hand, or, again, you can give yourself a hug. If you're in private, you don't have to worry about looking so funny. It really can change us physiologically. Because what's happening is the touch is a symbol of the care. Mm-hmm. For instance, they've got research showing you can put your hands in a box and have someone touch you. And if it's an aggressive touch, if it's an indifferent touch, if it's a warm and tender touch. We're very attuned to touch as human beings. So it's a really nice way to, again, communicate with yourself, your care, which in turn, changes your physiology. So I have to say as well, just, we also talked about this at the workshop. For some people, touch can be a little activating, maybe especially if you have some sort of trauma history or maybe your parents weren't the traditionally loving, supportive people that you hoped they were, especially for people whose parents were quite the opposite. What can actually happen is because you've been used your whole life to feeling closed and defensive to protect yourself, and you really had to be safe when you were a child, it can feel a little scary to start opening the doors of your heart with things like touch, because, you give yourself some love, immediately remember all the ways in which you were unloved. So some people, anyone can learn self-compassion. In fact, it's really good for people with trauma histories, because what you're really doing is kind of learning to reparent yourself. But you just have to accept that, it can go more slowly. There's a term we have called backdraft, which is actually when you fling open the doors of your heart and you let the fresh air of love in, the flames of pain and sorrow come out. It's really not a problem. It's like actually part of the transformation process. But people just need to be aware if they do have this backdraft response. It's normal, it's natural, it's nothing to be worried about. But for some people, they actually may want to start going down the path of self-compassion with the help of a therapist or someone, and just really allow yourself to be a slow learner. It can be a little more of a bumpy ride for some people than others. But again, the research is really encouraging that with adequate support, anyone can really learn to relate to themselves with more kindness. Even if it's just saying, I'm really upset, I'm going to take a warm bath. When it's done with intentionality like that as a choice to care for yourself when you're struggling, you're still practicing the muscle of self-compassion.
Yeah. So. That's great. So I love how you use the term reparenting yourself. Essentially, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, self-compassion is giving yourself that loving, connected presence, whatever it means, whether it's meditation or mindfulness or the touch or the positive self-talk instead of the negative self-talk. So being like a mother to ourselves, essentially.
Yeah, it's like the ideally compassionate mother, right? We think of, well, then it's actually both. It's one of the things some people get confused of. It is being like that ideally compassionate, kind of the yin, I call it the yin of self-compassion, kind of soothing, supportive, validating, very important. But it's also, fathers are also compassionate, right? Or the kind of male archetype, which I call kind of the yang of self-compassion. Going into a burning building and to save the people who are going to be engulfed by flames, that's also a supremely compassionate act, but it's more action-oriented. And so sometimes self-compassion is more yang. It kind of means like motivating yourself. You can't let yourself be treated this way, or you got to do something different. It's not working for you, or, kind of like providing for yourself. What do I need? What changes do I need to make to help myself be happy and thrive? That's also a very important way that we're self-compassionate. So it's really both. So you might say the ideally kind, soft, supportive, validating, soothing mother, and the ideally, motivating, providing, helpful, supportive father. And of course, it's not male or female. We both have both sides of ourselves inside. Every single person has both the yin and the yang. So it's really drawing on both and kind of integrating them.
It really is kind of like having the ideal parents, but you're giving it to yourself, both that yin and the yang. And
that's right.
Validating your feelings and soothing yourself. And I remember in the workshop, you said, one of the first steps is to name the feeling, and that alone starts to decrease the cortisol, and then to identify where you feel it in your body, and then to soothe yourself. I loved that sequence. I found it really helpful.
Yeah. And the naming and the finding it in your body, those are classic mindfulness techniques. And then kind of the soothing, supporting yourself, and maybe using some touch or some words of support or understanding. Those are bringing the compassion and the kindness and, perhaps the understanding, the wisdom of the common humanity. It's not just you aren't alone. This happened for a lot of conditions that you couldn't control. And so, layering in those elements in that order seems to be really effective, we find.
Well, there are so many great things I learned in the workshop, but I'm sure we can't cover them all. But is there any other area you'd like to talk about in relationship to self-compassion?
Well, we actually covered a lot of ground. But maybe I would just say that it's not an intellectual concept. Ideally, it's an experience. And so I would really encourage people, maybe those who are intrigued, first of all, that your misgivings about it are probably false. I've got an article on my website, The 5 Myths of Self-Compassion. It's not going to turn you into a lazy, good-for-nothing, weak person, selfish person. There's the research that shows that. So it's like once you can give yourself permission to give it a try, then just kind of see what happens. Next time something really difficult happens, see how the difference it makes to treat yourself, talk to yourself with kind, supportive language as opposed to this harsh, self-critical language. See for yourself how it makes a difference. And again, remembering that, yeah, it may feel uncomfortable and it may be not your habitual reaction. You may have to use a little intentionality to it, but it's not the end of the world. It's not rocket science, because most people, by the time they're adults, have learned to be supportive and kind and compassionate to their spouses, their kids, their friends. We know how to do it. So it's really just a matter of giving ourselves permission and then remembering to do it with ourselves. And then once you get that new habit pattern started, it's easier than you think, really.
So good. Well, tell us where we can find you online and what we might find on your website. And also for those interested in your mindful self-compassion workshop, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. I would say it was probably one of the top 3 most life-changing things I've ever done. But telling us what we can find on your website and where we can learn more about the workshop, please.
Yeah. So if you want to find me, just Google self-compassion, right? You spell it any way, you'll find me. It gets a lot of hits. And so I've really tried to make my website a resource, a hub for both people wanting to learn about it and also for researchers. So if you go to it, you can, for instance, take the self-compassion scale I developed, and you can find out, well, where are you? How self-compassionate are you? There's guided meditations, there's exercises that you can start practicing. And there's videos explaining self-compassion. I've got a TED Talk. If you're a science nerd, you can find, hundreds of research articles on there. And so I think that's a really good place to start. And then I also have a link to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion website, which really lists where you can take the mindful self-compassion training, hopefully near you. I also a lot of people teach like shorter workshops as well. You can take the Mindful Self-Compassion program online. And very exciting is we're coming out with a new workbook this August, where we actually take all the practices and exercises in the Mindful Self-Compassion program. We have it in a workbook format, so you could start practicing this on your own. So like I say, the resources are really available for you. It's more just a matter of choosing to try to relate a different way towards yourself. So
awesome. Well, I have 2 more questions. I always ask my guests, what does it mean for you to be a vibrant, happy woman?
Yeah. So, I'm very lucky because I'm so fulfilled in what I do. The fact that my work is so tied to my values and that I'm, have the gift of being able to help people by the work I do is just so fulfilling. And I also have a great partner and I love my son. So, I have to say probably for me personally, I get the greatest joy and fulfillment from the work I do. So I feel very, very blessed in that.
And let's have a challenge from you to our listeners, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay, well, so the challenge is the next time that you notice that you're struggling, feeling bad about yourself or something difficult happens, just pause, notice that you're struggling, and just ask yourself, how can I be a good friend to myself in this moment? What would I do for a good friend who is going through this? And just try it with yourself and just take that little step to first notice how you're treating yourself. Ask the question, what would it be like if I did it differently? And that will maybe start you on your path.
So good. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And yes, your work really is a legacy. It's so amazing. So thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Jen. It was great to be here.
I love everything Dr. Neff teaches, and I especially loved being in her 2-day workshop and learning how to be compassionate with myself and how that compassion extends to everyone around me. I hope you'll take some of what Dr. Neff talked about and apply it in your life and see what it would look like and feel like to have more self-compassion. It's so beautiful. For those of you who are members of the Vibrant Happy Women Club, we will be continuing this conversation in our small groups this week. And you also have a worksheet with journal prompts that will help you to go really deep on what you've learned. For those not in the Vibrant Happy Women Club, the doors are currently closed, but they will open again, and you can get on the wait list by going to vibranthappywomenclub.com. I'll be back later this week with a happy bit, and I'll be back next week talking with Janine Roth, all about showing up in our own 2 feet and being truly present in our bodies. It's funny. Many of us tend to treat our bodies really badly, and the word nurture comes to mind. What would it look like to actually nurture your body the way you might nurture a child? And in contrast, how would a child act if you treated them the way you've been treating your body? Inquiring minds want to know, and we'll be discussing that next week with Janine Roth. I'll see you then. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Vibrant Happy Women podcast at www.jenriday.com.